inflation will move higher. So inflation moves higher. So what's going to happen is that economy is still strong. Maybe Fed will not cut the rates, right? Fed may increase another 25 bips. So that's the point that is trying to set in right now. So if Fed goes in with, excuse me, Fed goes in with, let's say above 5.5, that's when you will start to see things actually starting to break. And we still have the lag effect of these Fed rate hikes that will still come into picture, maybe a little later through into summer, but that hasn't happened yet. That still needs to happen, and if Fed goes above 5.5, things will start to break, and we still need to figure out what is happening with the banking sector. We're still not there. We still don't really comprehend the full impact of that economy, the banking crisis, the solvency crisis. Will there be a bank run? Which bank will that be? Whether the FDIC is going to be insuring all the deposits? We don't know any of that, right? So we still need to, and as of now, it seems like that depositors are safe, but just in case, if larger banks start to come into that, issue of solvency, then it's going to be decent amount of stress on the banking system, and by extension on the economy. Right. Coming back to technicals, that's the upside. We are looking at 4170 area that clears 4190 area. To the downside, 5 on the day. So if it comes back into this number, about 4120, the second standard deviation, which it violated. If it comes back into that, 4120, 4118 is the number to the downside. That breaches, expecting it to come back into 4092 area. Of course, 41,000 will act as a decent support area psychologically, but there's nothing as of now I see on the higher time frame, so we might expect it to come back into 4090. Again, downside is 4120 to 4118 area that breaches about 41, that breaches about 4090 area. Basically, the 5 on ES on the daily, and that breaches, of course, it's going to come back into the 8. 8, nothing plotting anything sub 8 today. There's a 50 moving average, there's a 8, so very likely if it comes back down here, then very likely we'll still see an bounce here. Why would it come back down? The technicals are there for it to push back down. Maybe we'll get a test of the 8, and maybe you'll bounce out. Sorry, 5 will bounce here. 8 probably is not a thing for today, but we'll still keep an eye on it. If the 5 breaches, then the 8. And mind that the MACD is still crossed to the upside, but it's been pushing up for quite a few days. We might see a breather here. Um, Ideally, I want to see a breather come back down into the 5, and I still have those longer dated puts. I think not. I think I exited those puts on Friday, but not sure. I haven't opened my book yet. Uh, I think at least in one account I should be holding the longer dated puts, but still I'll put on a fresh trade. That's what I was looking at about from 41 thousand to 4120 area. I would wanted to put SPX longer dated puts. Um, I should have done it Friday, but still I could do it right now because we are still opening about in the same range that we closed. Let's go here on this chart. The 5 is still detached right about here, about 4078. Not looking to get this thing tested today. Maybe, if the data comes in softer, probably, or rather hotter, then probably we'll come back into this number. But as of now, not looking at that number. So my understanding is that to the downside, this is what the 50 moving average is the downside, 4017, or rather, even you can consider this lower inner Bollinger Band, about 4004 area, and to the upside, this is the bigger picture, right? 4230 area, and the downside, right about here, 4000 area. If that breaches, probably into 3944 area. I don't think it will breach, or rather, I don't think it's going to go down further into second standard deviation. If that happens, we'll catch that move. For now, I don't believe that it's going to breach the 5 or the 50 EMA on the week itself. So, or rather, it's going to be here. The downside, I don't think it's going to breach the 5, but if it starts to breach the 5 at 4090, then we'll look at the 5 on the week at about 4070 area. But I don't. I This is just charting. I don't believe that's going to happen. This is just charting, but in case Apple starts to push to the downside, alongside Microsoft, then we'll start to reassess the whole situation. Right, coming back down to the 1 hour chart. Oh, it's still overbought. This thing is still overbought. It just plays out the way it's supposed to play out, comes back down, RSI hits the bottom and bounces. Right? So these bounces could be ephemeral, and that's what is proving to be correct right now, ephemeral bounce. And one other thing to note is that the Bollinger Band is starting to squeeze here, right? And I don't like the squeezes. If it starts to squeeze, it could fire anyway. Hopefully, it fires to the downside. Hopefully, it comes back into this 4103 area, uh, at least for a first bounce. So let's say if it starts to come back down, five, it's bouncing off of the mean right now. So the mean reversion very likely would be another one more time, but there is a lot of support 5 8 and the baseline here at about 41.31. That breaches, we are looking for a mean reversion about 41.29, 41.30. Again, this should act as pretty decent support because there is support here on the higher time frame. This line, right, this line is holding right now, right about here, 41.29, 41.30 area. This line is holding for us to push to the downside. This line needs to breach. Then comes the second standard deviation, 41.20, 41.18 area. That needs to breach. Then we can expect it to come back into the 5 at about 40.90 area. 41 being a psychological level. Right. So to take that path, 5, 8, the mean, then probably here, then the 21, then likely into this half turn about 41.18. This seems like a very decent bounce spot. But if it comes back down into this 41.20, 41.18 area, very likely scenario, it might bounce for the first time. But then if it starts to come back down, very likely it will breach it and come down into here for a bounce about 41.12. Then likely scenario is 41.03. I'm thinking that this should be a decent bounce spot about 41 area. So yeah, I'll keep a watch on this one. Yeah, and to the upside, again, same thing. 41.41. If that 41.40 breaches, 41.40, 41.42 area that breaches, likely scenario the second standard deviation 41.48, 41.50 area that breaches. We'll look into 41.70 and above. Right, and let's get into Apple here. Right, this is a chart we've been following for quite some time, and this is the area we said Apple will very likely take a breather, and exactly as expected, it is happening. Apple is trying to take a breather. If it comes back down here and expect it to hit this number about 163.32 area, and we'll look for another bounce there. And if Apple clears this line at about 165.40 area, then likely scenario we are looking for further upside about 169, about 170, 171. And after this, probably the third standard deviation. I don't think it's going to get up to third standard deviation. I think it might take a breather here, and then very likely, if it wants to move higher, I think it will be on lower volume, right? And I think if it does move higher, probably people will try to short it. I will not be in this trade if it moves higher. Likely scenario, I'll wait for a pullback, and even if it moves higher, maybe maybe scalping and all that is fine, but nothing major. I'm not gonna chase this if it moves past this line. Probably I'll wait for it to come back down. I'll wait for it to resolve these overbought conditions, then I'll get involved in that trade to the upside if it happens. If it starts to come back down below the second standard deviation, 163.50 area, I'll be expecting it to come back into the 5. It's still not detached, but I would expect it to come back into the 5 at about 157.68 area. Probably not for today. Probably we'll trade the lower time. This is the weekly time frame, right? So this is a bigger picture. We want to see it here come back down into the 5. Although I'm not sure if it's going to come back down, maybe it might take a day or two for it to come back down, but I'm still expecting for it to come back down into this number, right? The 5, I'm still expecting it to test the 5. The 5 breaches, then the 8. Same scenario, 5 breaches 8. But it hasn't violated the second standard deviation, by much, but still, it is a violation of second standard deviation. Here it violated the second standard deviation, came back down. Again, it is violating the second standard deviation, expecting a pullback, probably into the 5. First, this needs to breach the second standard deviation about 163.50 area. Yeah, 163.50, 163.80 area. We want to see it breach that, and then expecting it to come back into the five, about 161 area. Again, going back onto this chart, same thing, five overbought conditions. This needs to be resolved. The MFI is still high up here. We are still expecting it to, or at least I'm still expecting it to come back down, 5.8, and the mean reversion. What happens after the mean reversion, we'll see. Right here, it is hitting the bottom and bouncing. This is not cool. But I think this bounce is ephemeral. I think this bounce is ephemeral. I think it still needs to continue back to the downside. The same thing, the upper inner Bollinger Band breaches, and it's going to come back down here into the baseline. Baseline breaches the mean at about 163.30 to 163.50 area. So this area is pretty decent for a bounce, and if that breaches, very likely it's going to come back into this number, 162.80, and then not expecting it to fall all the way down here to the 100 moving average at about 160, but very likely there's a lot of strength down here. And if it does breach the mean on the hour, or rather, if it does breach this number right here, right? There's a super trend going on here at about 162.80, 162.70 area. And if it breaches down here, then expecting it to move, right about here, 161.70, then likely scenario here at about 160.90, and then likely about here 160 area. As of now, plotting nothing sub 160 area, but if it does breach below that, then we'll start to plot something else. But as of now, plotting nothing sub 160 for Apple. Actually, let's see here, 162.80 area, if 162.70 area. If it breaches below there, then we'll start to look for the 50 and the 200 moving average on the hour, but it has to breach below this number here. As of now, I'm not thinking that it's going to breach below here. There's a lot of strength, but in fact, if it does start to breach below there, then we'll start to plot to the downside further. Upside Apple, same thing. It needs to clear above this line. If this is the upper threshold, 164, 165.40 area. If it clears above there, probably we're going to start seeing Apple into march into probably new highs, probably in a couple of weeks or so. But as of now, that's not the plan. As of now, this still should act as a decent resistance. And even if it breaches the resistance, I will not be chasing this trade here. Right. This is the Apple trade, and I think we charted Apple right about here. We were looking for Apple upside. We got that upside, and this spike is from rate cut. Sorry, the output reduction at OPEC plus, and this is nothing to do with our charting, but this just moved up, and it was pretty decent, aided by this move to the upside in MACD. Right, so the technicals are still there. So what next? I'm thinking that it's gonna go hit this number right about here, 200 moving average on the day, and very likely it will take a breather. But it might not do that in a straight line because it's up already 5%. It was up, I think, better than 8% last night, but it came back down a little bit. Let's see here. So this is the idea to the upside, 40, 82.64 area, a test of 82.64 to the upside, and to the downside, the 21 on the week, 78.20 area. Very likely if it comes back down, it will take a bounce here, right? So this is the upside and this is the downside. And if it clears this to the upside, then expect it to move all the way up here into 84.6, 84.50, 84.60 area. And the downside, if it breaches, and I don't know why it would breach, but if it does breach to the downside, about 68, 78, then expect it to come back here down into the mean on the week, about 76.63 area. Not plotting anything sub the mean, and in fact, I shouldn't be plotting anything below 21 for the week. But if it does come back down, we'll look for a push into the mean, and very likely, I think mean should on the mean on the week should hold. Although I don't know why it would get down to the mean, but just in case if it does get down, it should hold today. And if oil starts to come back down today, then very likely you'll see the markets also come back down. And let's get into this one. This chart is pretty unconclusive, but still we'll chart it. To the downside, the 50 moving average, and this is the US 10 chart. Downside 3.41, upside very likely is about 3.56. And if it clears the 3.56 of the upside, then we'll start to plot 3.59, and likely scenario is 3.68. Although I don't see this happening today, Um, but just in case that oil starts to move to the upside further, then likely. But what is this chart suggesting is that the Fed will not raise rates further. That's what this chart is suggesting. Fair and simple. But we'll see how that goes. But this is what this chart is suggesting as of now. Let's get here into US 10. So this thing is trying to cross to the upside. The MACD is trying to cross to the upside, but and just in case MACD crosses to the upside, we might expect a push all the way up here into the 200 moving average 3.51 area. That clears, the mean reversion will happen at about 3.58, 3.59 area. Not plotting anything above the mean today. And I don't know why would it actually cross to the mean today, but just in case the MACD crosses to the upside and it hits the mean probably today, and nothing above the mean. It should not move above the mean today on the US 10. And for tomorrow, if it touches the mean, if it hits the mean and takes a breather, then the likely scenario tomorrow it might push all the way up into this number 50 on the day, 3.68 area. And if it does, if it does do 20 bips on in a couple of days, then very likely it will push some downward pressure on the tech area, and we might see some downward pressure on the SPX as well. Let's get into DXY a little bit. Come on, DXY. Right, same thing. If US 10 crosses to the upside, as of now, there is nothing that is telling that your DXY will have a decent push to the upside, because now that oil is decidedly higher, and the Fed needs to step in and do something about it. If not, the inflation thing will be back again. Oil goes into everything, and if oil prices go up, everything, the prices on everything will go up. That's the idea there, and that the inflation fight will come back into picture, and Fed goes beyond 5.5, then you'll start to see recession, fears of recessions materializing quicker than expected, right? So this chart is still not there, but still, let's see upside probably if it clears 3.102.47. Same thing, the 5, the 8. If the 8 clears, then like the scenario, it will push into the 21 on the day. But not expecting it to actually come back up all the way into 21. But for some reason, oil does move above that 82 threshold. Very likely this will come back up, especially if the US 10 MACD crosses to the upside and US 10 starts to push 20 bips to the upside, then you'll see very likely DXY start to come back up. I think mean reversion hasn't happened for a long time, and I think mean reversion is due for DXY. Not saying it will happen today, but mean reversion is due, especially if US 10 starts to move to the upside. Mean reversion is due for DXY, and I'll not take this thing seriously until it clears the 8 on the day to the upside. Cool thing. Let's get a bit into Microsoft. Upside, same thing. I will not chase this thing, even if it moves past this number. I'll probably take it easy on the trade. And even if I want to get involved, I'll take far dated puts and short dated calls. That's the way I'll be structured on this trade. And I will not be chasing this rally. There is upcoming earnings. I don't know when is that, March 23rd, April 27th. So we still have time for this. A likely scenario after the earnings. Let's see how the Chat GPT is been profitable or not, whatever that is, or what's the commentary about Chat GPT. Then we'll start to see what happens with this trade after that. To the downside, to the upside, it is right now hitting that resistance and staying there. If it reaches there, then I'm expecting it to come back into 276, probably into 275. And these lines, especially on the lower time frames, these lines might not change on the higher time frames. Weekly might push up a little bit. So to the downside, very likely about 276, another 10 points, 277, I think. So about 10 points to the downside. Well, not sure whether we're going to get those 10 points today, but if Apple starts to move to the downside, very likely we'll see this 10-point realize to the downside for Microsoft. Again, if it moves up beyond this line, I will not be chasing this trade. But I don't want to put any bias into anybody's mind. If you think it is moving higher, yeah, go ahead, go for it. Especially trade those cues. Day trade. I would still want to see it come back down. I would still want to see it come back down into the five. However, on the day time frame, there is nothing that is saying this is overbought. Just about here is saying overbought, but besides that, is well within the second standard deviation. It did not do, it violated the second, it violated the third here, and also it was all the way up here. So it took a breather, but the march continued to the upside. So basically, on this trade, I'm thinking that it needs to curl back here. As of now, nothing is saying that it will curl back down, but if it curls back down, then likely scenario, I'll take this straight to the downside. To the downside, this is what I'm expecting. The 5 to get tested, 280 to 70 area. If that breaches the one standard deviation is about 281 area, and that breaches right now the 8 is sitting at about 280 area. These lines will change as soon as as soon as the market opens, as soon as this data gets populated here. These lines will change. From the 8 or rather the 5 might come down slightly. Right now it's about 280, 250. It might come down into probably 280 or 250, or rather 280, 150 to 281 area. That's what we're watching to the downside. Let's go here. Right. This chart, overbought conditions, clearly coming back down, clearly coming back down, hitting the bottom, bouncing. This is pretty, routine stuff. And still to the downside, if it breaches here, then expecting the mean reversion to happen, expecting the mean to hold a little bit. Then based on where the RSI would be, now if it again bounces, if it's again at the bottom, then we'll again expect a bounce, and if it moves up and then starts to move down, we'll expect it to come back into this number about 281 90 area, rather 282. That breaches just about here, 280.50. This should be a very decent bounce spot for Microsoft today, 280.50 area, the 50 average on the hour. And if it comes back down, we can expect decent, probably I don't know 1% to the downside on this thing on SPX. Hopefully, we get that downside 1%. Not really hoping for, not really looking for a further, better than 1% move today. Either side, actually to the upside, probably 0.5%, maybe even 1%. But to the downside, definitely not looking for anything beyond 1%. I think even if it starts to move to the downside, probably will be within the vicinity of zero point 0.5, zero point 0.6. It might take a bit of time for it to actually come back into that 41 area. Cool thing. Let's get into a bit of Tesla here. This drop in Tesla, well, technically, yes, there is this drop, and everybody was just about writing off Tesla's numbers, and in fact, Reuters ran a story that Tesla actually missed their numbers, and those were pre-prepared articles, I think, and many of the other major news networks as well. They ran stories about how Tesla is losing market share, or how Tesla, even after reducing their prices, they will not. So that was pre-planned, I think. And the likely scenario, if it breaches here and expected to come back down into 199.20, and after that, it might test this number right about here, 197.65 and 195.70 area. So chances are bright of this thing happening, especially if it starts to, come back down here. If it starts to, we want to see a bounce and then start to move down. And to the upside, let's say 201.45, then likely area the 5, the 8, and here there's a half turn right about here, 203.80. As of now, not really plotting anything above 203.80 area. However, if this clears, then expect it to move all the way up here into 206.80 area, right? So if it clears that 206.80, then we'll start to plot further upside. But that's the upside, and especially if Apple starts to move to the downside, then very likely this will immediately be a trade to the downside right about here, 199.40, and likely scenario 197.65. Then it should bounce within these two lines, and that should be a decent enough bounce. I think I'm not really plotting anything sub this 194.40 area, 194.50 area to the downside. And if it starts to move, probably that's a story for tomorrow. Right, let's get here with Tesla. Upside remains this number. I don't, for whatever reason, if even it starts to move to the upside, as of now, I think the numbers are good. It should move to the upside, but the sentiment is negative. And buy the news, sell the rumor kind of thing. Buy the rumor, sell the news. Right now, we are seeing that phenomenon that they are selling the news. And if it starts to move to the upside, this is what we are looking and plotting nothing above 200 moving average on the day. 215 216 area, and to the downside, I think it should act, this one should act as of now, this should act as pretty decent resistance. The 200 area, we last time I think we plotted 200 to the upside. If 200 cleared, then 202, this area, whatever this area was, that was from Friday, and of course it did clear that and move further up. But that's the upside threshold today, again 202.75 area. And to the downside, the 5 on the day should act as pretty decent bounce spot. And that breaches the 8 about 195. Not plotting anything sub the 8 today. But if for some reason selling starts to accelerate, then you know the drill. The next number is a 21, then the next number is the mean. I think the mean reversion is in cards for Tesla, but I don't think it's going to happen today unless Apple starts to move violently to the downside and gives up about, I don't know, 5 points or better than 5 points. I don't think it's going to move further down. I think the market will stall around here, these areas, until further, either the Microsoft or Apple or Tesla starts to, move to the downside violently. Let's get here for Tesla. This will remain the upside target, 214, 215, 216 area. And yeah, if it clears to the upside, then we'll start to see, further upside probably into this number, 222.70, 223 area. But as of now, this will remain as the right about here, right? This should act as decent resistance. And this is the bigger picture. This is, I'm not sure, I don't think this is going to happen today, but still, it's good to keep that in mind. 1 minute to open. Let's move into live trading.